what we see, we have a lot of small players that are specialized in very specific things. One example would be how to persist on a mobile phone that is an Android phone. So they would sell this persistence mechanism to the commercial surveillance vendors so they can use that. We see a lot of collaboration between all these small players with also the big players. I used to compare myself like working at Google, collaborating, for example, with Microsoft. I think we are competitor, but at the end we are collaborating.
Welcome to another episode of Mandiant's Defender's Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Luke McNamara. Back from a short, somewhat unintended hiatus, but that is the summer. And I am very excited for our next guest and the topic we're going to cover today. The topic is commercial surveillance vendors. And our guest today is Clement Lecigne, security engineer here at Google with TAG. Clement, great to be speaking with you today.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Well, there's a lot I want to get into here, but I think maybe where it would be good to start is this whole industry around commercial surveillance vendors. I think the first time that I heard of it was in relation to either the hacking team or Finfisher leaks that happened, I want to say back in 2014. I was starting in the cyber threat intel industry, and it was sort of an interesting kind of awakening to a particular part of the threat landscape. There were a lot of things I think that came out of that. There was interest, I think, around, there's quite a wide array of potential customers and countries that were looking to acquire this capability even back then. I'm sure that's only grown, of course, since then. But I want to start maybe there and kind of, from those incidents back in 2014, how have you seen this industry evolve and change over the years?
So as you said, the industry completely exploded. And 2014 is an interesting year because that's when I joined TAG, actually. And to give you an idea, when I started, I was actually tracking these companies. And at that time, it was taking only 20% of my time, I would say. And the other part was tracking the regular APT groups that we all know about. But this 20% time grew a lot over the years. And I think, a few years ago, it was at 100% time. And then in 2023, we finally decided to create a mission within TAG where people will just look at commercial surveillance vendors. And that is now 3 people full-time tracking all this ecosystem. So that's I think a good overview of the evolution.
And I think one of the other, dates and entities in this space that really stands out in my mind, again, as someone who doesn't follow this as closely as you do, I think it was 2017, and actually I believe it was some of the work from TAG were the disclosures around NSO Group. And I think a lot of the conversation that now exists around commercial surveillance vendors, certainly they're not the only ones out there, but often they're the ones that are sort of mentioned or discussed or probably most widely known. I'm kind of curious how that has shifted things as well, right? In terms of with these different players that exist now in this ecosystem, the fact that there is maybe more awareness of this as a threat vector or category of threat activity. Has that changed how these sort of entities operate? Certainly, every organization, every threat actor doesn't want to get discovered, but some of them care more about attribution than others, countering that attribution. So I'm curious now with this sort of increased focus on this, how has that shifted the behavior of some of these entities?
So first of all, I think I didn't say that, but back in the days, you had all the big players. You named a few, but at that time there were also a lot of small players that nobody know about, but they had a few customers. They were doing spyware things. And I think nowadays these small players became the big players that we are talking about in, for example, our report, Buying Spying. And you still have a lot of small players that are working behind the scene in the dark. So yeah, that's also part of the evolution. I think the small players became the big players, and new small players came into play. On the hiding side, I think they are spending maybe more and more time on the OPSEC compared to the previous year, where yeah, nobody were publishing about them. They were not really hiding. So now I guess they are hiding. They have probably teams within their organization doing just OPSEC related things. From my side, what I see is that they are adding more and more checks before delivering anything malicious to the target or to the person that is targeted. I think on the customer side, I think customers is actually the one that are using the technology, so they have to have also a good OPSEC. So I think they are training a bit better the customers to make sure that they don't do any OPSEC mistakes that we could spot. Also, one thing maybe on the public front, usually these companies they had websites where they were advertising exactly what they were doing. I think in these recent days, I think it's not the case anymore. If you have a company, if they have a website, it's hidden what they're doing. It's very blurry. If you want to know what they are exactly doing, you need to reach out to them. So this has changed too. Some of the companies they completely work in the dark. They don't need a public website. They just have a set of customers that they work with, and they are staying like that.
Yeah, as I was, preparing some notes for this conversation, I was thinking, in a lot of ways, there's some similar overlaps with what we see in parts of like the ransomware ecosystem or cybercrime ecosystem, where you have, a variety of different actors and players and personas that maybe specialize in certain things. You have, individuals that will move from certain brands or groups from one to another. Certain ones that as there's more attention on them, there's more heat from law enforcement, they will also kind of shift or fade away or rebrand and come back. I'm kind of curious, you mentioned kind of the smaller players, and do you see that sort of specialization? And you also noted, for some of these not wanting to have a very public web presence. Are there certain, of the entities and in the space that focus more on kind of niche services or offerings, and they do that, they sell that, or they partner with others through kind of a web of connections that they might already have, or how does that kind of look like in the overall structure of this ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the full picture, but from what we see, we have a lot of small players that are specialized in very specific things. One example would be how to persist on a mobile phone that is an Android phone. So they would sell this persistence mechanism to the commercial surveillance vendors so they can use that. We see a lot of collaboration between all these small players with also the big players. I used to compare myself like working at Google, collaborating, for example, with Microsoft. I think we are competitor, but at the end we are collaborating each other. The same thing is happening in this ecosystem.
Let's get into a little bit of the actual activities. So again, as someone who more tangentially follows this, it seems when you talk about commercial surveillance vendors, often the activity you're talking about is mobile malware. I guess maybe just kind of talk about what we're, because I know it's not exclusively that, but mobile malware certainly makes up a big piece of this, or mobile targeting, I should say, to be more specific. Yeah, what do we see these commercial surveillance vendors offering in terms of services? What are they doing when they're carrying out their operations?
So yeah, in my opinion, mobile is probably the hardest platform to target, but that's also what the customers are after. I think the only information they are after is on the mobile device of the target and not elsewhere. So that's why most of the CSVs they have to focus on the mobile. We do see a few that are also not specialized but are offering desktop surveillance, but that's mostly something on the side that they are offering because it's easy for them to offer that, because usually you would use the same exploits, same vulnerabilities on Chrome, on Android, and on Windows. So it's kind of cheap for them to provide desktop monitoring as well. I think what I've changed on the mobile is that the spyware themselves, I think they are also getting better and better in terms of capabilities. I think if you think about that, Pegasus was created around the same time as Chrome. And if you see the evolution of Chrome, you can also imagine the evolution of Pegasus. So yeah, they have support for all the messaging apps. They have support to talk to the Google servers, to the WhatsApp servers, to fetch the information that is not on the device itself, but on the cloud. So yeah, we see a lot of evolution on that space too. Like yeah, not only 0 days are getting used, but the spyware itself that is on the device is also really really sophisticated.
And it makes sense for a number of reasons why mobile would be kind of the preferred platform to target and go after, right? You're able to track an individual's movements. You're able to access potentially the microphone, capture ambient noise, things of that nature, the contacts, the people they're communicating with. I am curious about, because you mentioned the buying spying report, and it talked about not just mobile targeting, but also targeting of the Chrome browser. Could you go a little bit more into that? And when we're seeing that, is that primarily on, um, the mobile platform, or is that Chrome browsers also, on, desktops, laptops, and kind of where or why a threat actor would focus on that in addition to or instead of targeting mobile?
So what we see from our side is mostly exploits targeting Chrome browser on mobile. But when we get the exploits from the technical aspect of the exploits, we can see that the exploit was developed also to be able to target Windows version of Chrome. But usually, when we discover the exploit in the wild, it's usually meant to target mobile. But from the code of the exploit, we do see that the exploit was also meant to be possible to target desktop.
And what would you say is kind of maybe a rough estimate, over the years? Are we continuing to see more of a focus on mobile? Is it stayed about the same? What's that sort of, percentage breakdown of that versus other operating systems and platforms?
I would say 80% mobile and maybe 20% for the rest. And I think this has been like that for the past few years, and I don't think that would change. If it changed, I think that would be more on the mobile side. Like, yeah, I think desktop is probably less interesting for customers of surveillance vendors.
And is this more, the targeting, trying to get access to, root access to the actual operating system or platform, or are we also seeing things like we see? There's actually another recent blog from Tag just a couple weeks ago about APT42 and some of the activity they do in going after and capturing credentials. Do we see that sort of focus from some of these entities as well? That focus on stealing credentials?
No, we don't see that yet.
Hmm.
What we see still is still yeah the full what they would deploy from this exploits would be the full featured spyware. But I guess over time, with more and more mitigation, more and more defense in depth, they will have to adapt. And yeah, I think they might go after credential, or they might go after something else that is not the full access on the phone. We actually do plan to release a blog this week about the use of exploits against Chrome and Safari just to steal the cookies. And they are doing that just because, yeah, they just need one vulnerability in Safari to get access to all the cookies of all the websites. So that's a way of, yeah, not having a full exploit chain, but just using one vulnerability to get actual information about the victim.
We'll definitely include a link to that blog. This podcast will likely come out after it gets published, but that is an interesting thing that you say, and maybe an interesting thing to track. I would imagine again, the sort of full featured spyware is probably something that getting that sort of access on a victim platform is probably what they want to sell their customers. But if there is increased mitigation and that becomes harder and harder for them to do we see that shift to again sort of credential collection and compromising just email accounts or other things that don't offer the full extent of what you would want to do if you're targeting an individual, but is maybe certainly successful. We see that from a wide variety of threat actors using that. So That's maybe something interesting to see as this kind of space progresses.
Yeah, likewise, the targeted software, they might also change, like they keep targeting the browser. But I think you have also application on your phone that you use alongside your browser that are maybe also as vulnerable and easily vulnerable compared to a browser. So they might shift to targeting these applications instead.
Let's talk about something else that I think closely parallels this, and that is sort of the increased rise of 0 days that at least we're finding, right? And the question is always, what are we not finding or not seeing? In the report last year around 0 days, that I think was it was a collaboration between Project Zero and Tag. It noted a pretty significant amount. I want to say it was 25 0 days being exploited in the wild that Tag found, and 23 of those were linked back to CSVs. This problem overall is increasing, but certainly it seems like the sophistication, again, harkening back to the days of Finn Fisher and Hacking Team, the sophistication that we're seeing is also increasing. So maybe talk a little bit about that, the 0 day piece of this.
So yeah, I think 0 days have been there since day one. We just didn't know before. I was actually surprised when the hacking team leak happened, and we did see 0 days being used by them. This is something that we didn't know about before. But yeah, now I think the use of 0 days, yeah, is a common techniques among all of them, and even the small players, they do have access to 0 day exploits. I think we talked about some of the companies in our report, like yeah, a company that we didn't know before, but we realized that they have access to 0 days. That has increased, and not only on the CSV side. I think if you look at the APT side, you have all these DPRK groups that also have these capabilities. And yeah, if I would be an enterprise, I would be more concerned about them using them against enterprise than yeah, customer or CSV using them against enterprise.
What do you think is driving that? Why do you think that we are seeing more of these being employed in by CSVs?
I think we are also, yeah. So there is one thing is that we are getting better at defense, and we are getting better at detecting these 0 days. I think that is one argument of why we have seen so many last year. Yeah, I think we see also a lot of more I would say exploit shop companies that are actually doing exploit development and are selling exploits to CSVs and agencies. So maybe there are more exploits out there due to that.
Yeah, I mean, this goes, I guess, back to the question around different parts of this ecosystem and maybe individuals or entities that focus on specializing in something that could be provided. And I think, kind of similarly, there's been theorization around the increased. I think we saw it actually drop a little bit last year, but the last several years, the increase in financially motivated threat actors using 0 days. And I think people have argued somewhat persuasively, I think, that you have some of these ransomware extortion groups. They've gotten very, very rich. They're reinvesting some of those profits in either procuring 0 days or funding vulnerability research in some ways. So it is interesting to kind of see that across these different areas of threat, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. We do also track like ransomware groups that are using 0 days and using the money that they get to acquire 0 days. So yeah, that's also a trend there.
Something you said I want to return to, about enterprises, and I think probably because this is more of a Mandiant customer focused podcast, or the people that find us probably are kind of in that space. So they're more of your traditional enterprises. A lot of the activity, certainly that's come out over the years around individuals impacted by spyware and commercial surveillance vendor activity, are just that. They're individuals, are often individuals working in human rights or other sorts of roles, and are targeted. For organizations that are working at a more traditional commercial enterprise, should they be thinking more about the problem posed by commercial surveillance vendors? I think this is maybe a little bit of adjacent space, but in kind of the hacker for hire space, Dark Basin several years ago, they were hacker for hires, but they were going after a lot of corporations, right? So yeah, just like, how should organizations in kind of the more commercial space be thinking about this problem? Should they be taking it more seriously than maybe they've done historically?
That's a good question. Of course, there is always a risk because technically the tooling that they are providing can be used against enterprise. But I think the model that they are using, like the commercial vendors, I think the tools that they are providing is really meant to target individuals. Like I think the operators are very limited in what they can do on the phone, so it's meant to collect information. And as an example, I don't think you would easily be able to move laterally within the network of the compromised phone, like you would expect from an APT group malware. So yeah, honestly, I would be more worried about DPRK than CSVs. But yeah, there is always a risk.
That's a good security researcher answer. There's always a risk. You have to pay attention to everything. But I think that makes sense, especially the kind of lateral movement limitations there. But I guess maybe, in closing, your final thoughts on you've been tracking this space and this kind of industry really for quite some time. Where do you see it going in the future? We talked about some, potential futures if this becomes more difficult to deploy full featured spyware, how that might shift, or the increased focus on 0-day usage, but just generally maybe stuff that we haven't covered, or to kind of wrap this up, where do you see this industry progressing?
So I think they will still be around due to the fact that I think customers will be still be there, and the demand will probably grow. I think because of all these defense that we put in place, end-to-end encryption, TLS everywhere. I think all the traditional use of collecting information passively are not working anymore. So the only option would go after the device itself. So I guess they are not going away. I guess as I said, with all the defense that are put in place, they will have to shift a bit their capabilities. I guess they will not be able to offer the full capabilities, spyware capabilities to the customer, but just a tiny subset. And on the policy side, I think that's something that we need to monitor. Like more and more governments are trying to put some policy around the usage of surveillance tools. So I think they want to comply with the law, they will have also to be more transparent and be more careful about the customers and what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a piece we've not touched on in this conversation, is sort of the larger international policy response and restrictions or even sanctioning that we've seen, from some governments across this industry. But I guess maybe to close this off, I'll refer to what I said at the beginning around, when Hacking Team and the Finfisher leaks happened. It was quite surprising, just the range of organizations and governments interested in this capability. And I think that certainly has not changed. It's probably only grown. So I think for that reason alone, there's probably going to be continued interest in procuring these sorts of capabilities. And I'm sure, to your point, there's going to be, whether it's companies rebranding, new ones emerging, people going to start new companies, there's always going to be someone to kind of offer this skill and capability.
Definitely.
Well, Kamal, thank you for your time. This has certainly been a great conversation. I'll include the link to the blog you mentioned that's coming out, and then also the buying spying report, which I think is a very good encapsulation of some of these trends and some of the work that your team at TAG has been involved in. But thank you once again, and have a great rest of your day.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a good one.